There's a video that once sparked controversy, where Ryan F9 claimed the Indian FTR was one of the most beautiful motorcycles ever built, because of, well, the lines. And in that very same video, he also mentioned the Suzuki Katana, only to dismiss its looks altogether. The reason? Once again, the lines. But hold on a second. That Katana, it's now sitting in a design museum, and the only reason it's there is because of how it looks, which begs the question, did we completely misjudge this motorcycle from the very start? Because if there's one thing that truly offends a motorcycle manufacturer, it's being called conservative. And by the late 1970s, that's exactly what people were saying about the Japanese brands. Clean designs, smooth curves, predictable styling, and boring. For a decade, they had dominated in power, technology, and performance. But by then, things had started to feel repetitive. European brands like BMW, Ducati, and MV Agusta were breaking the mold, while the Japanese, especially Suzuki, faced a hard truth. Customers were beginning to lose interest. So they made a move no one expected. They didn't add more horsepower. They didn't bolt on extra cylinders. They chose a completely different direction. They set out to design something no one had ever seen before, and they handed over full creative control to a team of German designers. The result? A motorcycle people either passionately loved or completely despised. A design so radical, it made the entire motorcycle world stop and ask, what on earth is this thing? And that very design, 40 years later, is still remembered as one of the greatest turning points in Japanese motorcycle history. Let's find out what happened to the Suzuki Katana. A crisis of confidence and a market losing interest. By the late 1970s, Japanese motorcycles had become a known quantity. They were fast, they were reliable, they were everywhere. But there was one thing they weren't anymore. Surprising. Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, and especially Suzuki had built their reputations on performance and precision. But when it came to design, they played it safe. The Universal Japanese Motorcycle, or UJM, had become the default look. Square tanks, round headlights, flat seats. Functional? Sure. Memorable? Not really. And the market was starting to feel it. Riders, especially in Europe, were craving something more bold. BMW was experimenting with aerodynamic fairings. Ducati was pushing exotic V-twins. MV Agusta, turning heads with pure Italian drama on two wheels. Meanwhile, Japan kept doing what Japan did best, building bikes that worked like clockwork, but looked like clones of the bikes from last year, and the year before that. Suzuki knew they couldn't just slap 10 more horsepower onto a GS 1000 and call it a revolution. They didn't need another CBX or another Z1. What they needed was a statement. Something that didn't just break the mold, but obliterated it. And that's when they made the boldest decision in their history, to hand over the design of their next flagship motorcycle to a small team of German outsiders. A radical outsider vision. So what did Suzuki do when they realized the status quo wasn't cutting it anymore? They broke every rule in the Japanese playbook. Instead of keeping design in-house, like every other major Japanese manufacturer at the time, they went looking for something foreign. Literally. They handed the future of their next flagship motorcycle over to a small, upstart German design studio called Target Design. The team? Just 3 men. Hans Muth, Jan Fellstrom, and Hans-Georg Kasten. Not a massive department. Not a long list of titles. Just 3 minds with a clear, uncompromising vision. And here's the shocking part. Suzuki didn't micromanage a single detail. No corporate interference. No 50-page design brief. Just one simple instruction. Make us a European-style sport bike. And with that, the team at Target Design was set free. No restrictions, no legacy to protect, just a blank canvas and the weight of expectation. They called the project Katana, named after the legendary Japanese sword. Not just for style, but for what the name represented: precision, simplicity, lethality, discipline. This wasn't going to be just another motorcycle. It was going to be a weapon, refined, elegant, and utterly unapologetic. Suzuki had rolled the dice, and what came next would either change everything or blow up in their face. A blade in motion. When the first sketches of the Katana surfaced, people didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't just a departure from Japanese norms. It was a full-blown design rebellion. The fuel tank alone turned heads. Gone was the familiar teardrop shape borrowed from British bikes. In its place, a wedge, sharp, angular, leaning forward like it was already chasing the horizon. It didn't flow with the frame, it launched from it. Then came the headlight, square, fixed to the chassis, refusing to turn with the bars. It broke every rule of traditional styling. It looked futuristic, and that was exactly the point. But the real magic? What Hans Muth called the fly line. A continuous slicing silhouette that ran from nose to tail, like the arc of a katana sword mid-strike. Nothing broke that line. Nothing interrupted the motion. Even at a standstill, the bike looked like it was moving at 100 miles an hour. Clip-on handlebars, rare outside the racetrack, appeared on a mass-production Japanese bike for the very first time. A nod to performance, a challenge to the status quo. Every detail told a story. Two-tone seat that looked molded into the body. Tightly packed gauges, needles battling for dominance, hidden switches, subtle angles. This was design with intention. The Katana didn't whisper its purpose. It shouted it. Across parking lots, across decades, across cultures. This wasn't styling. This was a statement. Speed meets stability. Of course, bold design means nothing if the machine can't back it up. And the Katana? Oh, it backed it up, loudly. Underneath all that sculpted bodywork was a proven heart. The legendary GSX 1100 inline 4. 4 cylinders, 16 valves. 1,100 cubic centimeters of air-cooled punch. But Suzuki didn't just drop the engine in and call it a day. They gave it a few crucial tweaks. A lightened alternator, revised camshaft, upgraded carbs. Just enough to push the Katana to 111 horsepower at 8,500 RPM. That may not sound outrageous today, but in 1981 it was staggering. This was a production motorcycle capable of 150 miles per hour. Not just in a straight line, but with a level of high-speed stability that shocked reviewers. Other Japanese bikes of the era, CBX, Z1s, Mach IVs, sure, they could go fast. But once you crossed 115 miles per hour, they turned twitchy, dangerous. You held on and hoped. The Katana changed that. It didn't just tolerate speed, it demanded it. Even the front forks came equipped with anti-dive technology, borrowed straight from Suzuki's two-stroke race machines. The idea was good. Control under braking. But in practice, most riders ended up disabling it. The system just wasn't quite there yet. Still, the message was clear. This wasn't just a fast bike. It was a fast bike that knew how to behave when pushed to its limits. Riding the razor's edge. If the Katana looked like a weapon standing still, riding it felt like trying to tame one in motion. The seating position was a radical departure from anything Japanese riders were used to. Instead of sitting tall and upright like on a standard UJM, you were dropped low, your weight pitched forward, arms stretched out. You didn't sit on the Katana, you sat in it. For some, this new posture was thrilling. For others, it was brutal. One early reviewer famously called the experience excruciatingly painful. And sure, if you were just puttering around town, the Katana felt stiff, awkward, even hostile. But once you opened it up, once you leaned into the wind at highway speeds, the bike transformed. Everything settled into place. It came alive. This was a machine built for speed, not stoplights. And in that sense, it was ahead of its time. Because today, that tucked-in, aggressive riding posture is standard issue on every modern sport bike. But in 1981, it was shocking, daring, unapologetic. The Katana wasn't trying to be comfortable. It was trying to redefine what performance felt like, starting with the rider's own body. And for those bold enough to accept the challenge, it delivered something unforgettable. From concept to concrete. Now here's where the Katana truly breaks the mold, not just in how it looked or how it rode, but in how it made the leap from concept to production. Most concept bikes? They're just for show. A little too wild, a little too ambitious, usually toned down or watered down before they ever reach a dealership floor. But not the Katana. The version displayed at the 1980 Cologne Motor Show, designated ED2, wasn't a fantasy. It was a warning shot. And what rolled off the production line soon after was almost identical. Suzuki didn't pull back. They didn't soften the edges or dull the blade. They went all in. Go big or go home. And they weren't going home. Even more impressive, they didn't build an entirely new platform. Instead, they took an existing frame and engine, borrowed from the GSX 1100, and dropped this radical new design on top. No retooling, no massive investment in production changes, just vision, confidence, and execution. Very few manufacturers would take that risk. Fewer still would survive it. But Suzuki did. And in doing so, they turned a concept into a production bike that looked like a prototype and felt like a revolution. Misunderstood at first, immortalized later. When the Katana first hit showroom floors, a lot of people didn't get it. It looked too strange, too angular, too un-Japanese. Many dismissed it as a marketing stunt, just another flashy concept that somehow slipped through the cracks into production. Dealers weren't sure how to sell it. Reviewers didn't know what box to put it in. And for a bike that was so bold, sales were surprisingly modest. But time has a funny way of sorting things out. What once looked bizarre started to look ahead of its time. Riders who once turned their noses up at it found themselves staring at it longer, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this thing had something special. And then it happened. The posters went up, in garages, in bedrooms, in back walls of bike shops. Kids who couldn't afford one would cut out photos from magazines. They didn't care if the Katana sold well. They cared that it looked like nothing else on the road. And in the years that followed, its influence only grew. Its DNA ran deep into the veins of Suzuki's next big leap, the GSX R750, a machine many consider the first true modern sport bike. So no, the Katana didn't win the sales race, but it won something far more enduring: legacy. Not built to win, but built to prove a point. With all that speed, all that presence, you might think the Katana was destined for the podium. But Suzuki had other ideas. In 1981, they developed a special version, the Katana 1000, specifically for homologation. It was built to meet racing regulations for AMA Superbike and TT Formula One. Slightly smaller displacement than the production 1100, but still packing nearly the same punch. They reworked the cams, strengthened the rods, tweaked a few internals to give it the grit needed for the track. On paper, it was ready. But in the heat of battle, the Katana struggled to keep up. It wasn't slow, far from it, but it wasn't born to race. Not like Eddie Lawson's Kawasaki or the factory Hondas. It wasn't built from the ground up as a pure competition machine. It was a design-led street bike, refined, heavy, powerful, but not razor-sharp in the way a true race bike needed to be. Still, that didn't make it a failure. If anything, it proved something more important, that the Katana platform had range, that Suzuki's radical new design could stretch beyond style and hold its own under pressure, even when the odds weren't in its favor. It wasn't there to dominate, it was there to show it belonged. And that's a win of a different kind. Beauty by design or by defiance. To this day, the katana remains a lightning rod in design debates. Some say it's ugly, others call it genius. And maybe, just maybe, it's both. In one critique, Ryan F9 described the katana's design as confused. Circles here, angles there, sharp lines clashing with soft ones. No cohesion, no harmony. But what if that was the point? Enter a very old idea, sprezzatura, a kind of intentional imperfection, a look that says, I'm not trying too hard, and that's exactly why it works. You see it in vintage Patek Philippe watches, a little round here, a little square there, yet somehow elegant. You see it in the tilted hats and messy hair of World War II-era GIs, in suits with just off-the-mark collars. Effortless cool, masculine confidence, power held in reserve. The katana didn't try to be beautiful the way a Triumph Bonneville or a Norton Commando might. It wasn't soft, it wasn't curvy, it wasn't feminine. It was sharp, unapologetic, and distinctly male in its energy, like a katana sword pulled from its sheath. So maybe Ryan was right. It isn't beautiful in the classic sense, but maybe that's because it was never meant to be. Maybe it was meant to intimidate first and impress later. More than a motorcycle, a statement. At the end of the day, the katana wasn't just a bike. It was a line in the sand, a bold declaration that Japan could do more than build fast, reliable machines. It could build motorcycles with soul, with attitude, with vision. It broke completely free from the UJM template, that safe, square formula the Big Four had leaned on for years. And by doing so, the katana helped ignite something bigger than itself. It inspired a generation of designers in Japan and around the world to stop asking what works and start asking what makes people feel something. That's not a spec sheet decision. That's art. And make no mistake, Suzuki knew exactly what they had. The katana stayed in production in one form or another until 2006. And then, decades after its controversial debut, it came roaring back in 2019. Same name, same spirit, sharper than ever. Because great design doesn't fade. It evolves. It sticks in your head. It starts conversations, even arguments. But most of all, it proves something timeless, that sometimes the most unforgettable machines are the ones that refuse to blend in. The Suzuki Katana was never meant for the masses. It wasn't designed to please every eye. And it's definitely not the kind of bike you fall in love with at first glance, but just like a true katana sword. It wasn't made to sit behind glass. It was made to be wielded, to be understood by those who appreciate refined strength. The more you look at it, the more you ride it, the more you realize it was built for something bigger and with a vision far ahead of its time. The katana isn't beautiful in the traditional sense, but it forced the entire motorcycle world to rethink what beauty even means. It isn't perfect, and that's exactly why it's unforgettable. It didn't win championships, but it paved the way for the modern sport bikes we know today. What about you? Did you ever think the katana looked odd? Or were you one of the few who fell for it from the very beginning? Was there a design detail that blew your mind? Or maybe drove you nuts? Drop a comment below, because your story is what keeps legends like the katana alive. If you enjoyed this ride, go ahead and hit that like button. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more bold, controversial machines that deserve to be remembered. We'll see you next time, where motorcycles aren't just machines, they're a statement.